Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the latest goings on in the Ramesh Sunny Balwani Theranos case. This is the second video in what is hopefully a series as we follow his trial, which is currently scheduled to begin in March 2022. This video covers one of the pre-trial hearings where the government attorneys and Balwani's attorneys discuss what evidence can and can't be brought into court and gives us some hints as to what lines of argument both sides might make. As a reminder, Balwani is in court accused of multiple counts of fraud against doctors, patients and investors in connection with his role as COO and President of Theranos, alongside his co-conspirator CEO Elizabeth Holmes. Now he is facing 12 counts, and for those of you who followed the Holmes trial, you might remember that there were 11 counts that the jury debated on. The reason for this difference is that Holmes originally did face 12 counts, but during her trial one indictment against a patient was dropped as the government had presented incorrect information relating to the patient's health issues. An error on the part of the government, which I guess they will not make in this case. If you don't want to miss out on future updates in this series, then hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. As one final reminder, Theranos was touted as a revolutionary blood testing company that aimed to be an industry disruptor, applying its technology locally, conveniently, and much cheaper than its rivals. It was worth over $9 billion at its height, but ultimately crashed and burned when its technology was found to be sadly defective. It had to void most of the blood tests it ever took, and investors lost just shy of $1 billion. So what's been going on? Now the hearings we're looking at took place over the last week. Balwani was there, as were his attorneys and attorneys for the government. And I must give a shout out to Dorothy Atkins, who covered a lot of this along with apparently only one other reporter, and on whose very detailed coverage I've primarily based this update. You can check her out on Twitter. There appears to be a lot fewer reporters directly covering this pre-trial part of Balwani's indictment, far fewer than Holmes' trial. I wonder if this will continue when his trial commences. So on to events. Balwani's attorneys are from the firm Orrick and represented by Jeffrey Cooper Smith, and on behalf of the government we have the familiar faces, at least to those who followed the Holmes case, of Robert Leach, John Bostic, Jeff Schenck and Kelly Volcar et al. The government at first, through John Bostic, made the case that most of the pre-trial issues could be dealt with through written exchanges. The defence are saying that oral arguments need to be made. In particular, they say that this is Balwani's trial and not Holmes', and so these issues need to be provided the same level of attention. Effectively, they can't just be brushed aside for the judge's decisions at a later date. This is the first time for Balwani, whereas it is the second time for the prosecution. Oh, I should also make the point here that the judge is Edward de Villa, the same judge who presided over the Holmes case, and he made the point that he saw Jeffrey Cooper Smith, who is acting for Balwani, most days in court at the Holmes trial. De Villa says he's going to give each side approximately 1 hour for voir dire at the start of the trial, and this is the point where the attorneys will question the jurors or potential jurors and decide to admit them for service or not. Given that some of the jurors in the Holmes trial left, saying effectively that they couldn't be fair on the jury, it will be interesting to see whether this gets more attention by the attorneys in Balwani's case. He also made some background comments relating to COVID management and technology. The Holmes trial actually had a few days when technology failed, and De Villa quips that he will have his masking tape ready just in case. At the moment, apparently the government's list of potential witnesses amounts to around 175, and in the Holmes trial there were only about 30 called. The defence want the potential number to be reduced, and the prosecution essentially say that this will likely be the case. Balwani wants reserved seats for his family. Now this is interesting, as Balwani is making the assumption that his trial will be as closely followed as Holmes was, and hence space will be at a premium in court. Now I know some will regard this as an arrogance on his part, as he is really the secondary character in this whole Theranos court saga. We can only wait and see what the levels of interest are. Balwani's counsel wants the judge to bar evidence stating that Theranos undertook faulty tests on third-party machines. It shouldn't have been in the Holmes trial, and, in quotes, what happened in the Holmes trial shouldn't be applicable to Balwani's case. There was a heap of discussion on the 2015 CMS report, And as a reminder, this was a technical medical audit of Theranos which was damning of it and its practices, and not surprisingly Balwani's counsel wants it excluded. Now Holmes' lawyers argued hard for this as well, but they were unsuccessful. Also, the decision to void millions of test results after the CMS report should be excluded, as it was voluntary, it wasn't required, it was made to promote public safety and therefore is irrelevant. Related to this is that they want the prosecutors not to ask the lab director Kingshuk Das about voiding tests. The judge then pointed out that he's surprised that Balwani's counsel has actually submitted 10 pages worth of questions they want off limit at trial. Balwani's counsel then says the fact is the indictment has mistakes, and inaccurately says HIV and gonorrhea tests were done on Theranos devices. And the prosecution's response to this is that the hypertechnical analysis of the indictment is inappropriate. Now, to me at least, surely the indictment needs to be correct. If there are errors on it, they need to be corrected, hypertechnical or not. Well, it does seem relevant to me. Anyway, Davila held off on this ruling, for now at least. Balwani's counsel wants to limit Erica Chung's testimony on various topics, and if you remember, she was the whistleblower who Holmes and Balwani harassed with legal firms and private investigators. The prosecution disagrees. One of the most humanising, enlightening and very embarrassing things that occurred in the Holmes trial was the reading out of personal and private emails between Balwani and Holmes, who were having a relationship at the time. Not surprisingly, Balwani's defence wants these suppressed. Some texts, for example, mention death, sex, murder and filth, and Balwani's counsel says that these are just irrelevant and confusing. Prosecutor Jeff Schenck says the texts are relevant and proves knowledge and intent by Balwani that there was a scheme to defraud, because some of them, as per Holmes' trial, were about John Carreyrou's Wall Street Journal articles, and he was the journalist who broke the story of Theranos deficiencies, and Rupert Murdoch, a high-profile investor. Balwani's counsel also wants excluded texts with Holmes about Carreyrou's French heritage and his texts about women over 40. The attorney says they're just irrelevant. Again, the judge defers his decision. That was essentially day 1 of the pretrial hearing, and we moved on to day 2. One of the things that happened in the lead up to the Holmes trial was that the Theranos database was effectively lost because someone lost the encryption key, and the prosecution want to argue in part that Balwani was involved in it. His attorneys obviously want this suppressed in court. Now last year the judge said it was partly Wilmer Hale's attorney's fault, and as a reminder these were attorneys for Theranos, and there was quite some debate on this. John Bostic for the prosecution says Balwani's role in losing the Theranos database is, in quotes, more concrete than he suggests. For example, Balwani was friends with the Theranos IT guy who copied the database, and Balwani's counsel spoke to him about the database around the time that the copy was made. Balwani's counsel wants to argue during the trial that without the Theranos database the government can't prove its case, and they don't have to get into who is to blame for losing the database, and the judge doesn't really seem impressed by this. Balwani's counsel argues that the government's suggestion Balwani had anything to do with losing the database, which the defence claims is exculpatory, is wrong, and the government's evidence is just disgraceful. It's bad faith. The whole investigation is the height of bad faith. Balwani's counsel also says that he was in touch with the Theranos IT guy only to get a copy of the database, not to destroy it, and the interactions weren't malicious. Judge Davila suggests that the IT guy maybe need to call as a witness to prove Balwani's position. Balwani's counsel says that the government's own experts told prosecutors to get the Theranos databases, etc., which were in storage. But prosecutors never did, and therefore the government is to be blamed for losing the database and its allegedly exculpatory evidence. Bostic, for the prosecution, says that the government wasn't notified Theranos planned to destroy its servers and hard drives, but even so, Balwani's claim that the database contained exculpatory evidence is therefore entirely speculative. More arguments continued, but Judge Davila cuts them off, and he notes that he looks, in quotes, at this through the lens of fairness, and also in quotes, I don't think it overstates it that at a minimum the government did not receive fulsome information about what was happening. He said that the issue of the missing database, in quotes, paints a picture of deception. Oh dear, I don't think Balwani's team is making headway on this one, and I think this is clearly going to be a significant item in Balwani's trial. Well, that's it for now. If you want to keep up with the trial and receive notifications when new videos are published, then please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and you won't miss out. I'll just leave you with a short run through of the current timetable. Bye for now.